This is a day that our God has made. Welcome everyone to Wayfarers Chapel, the National Memorial to Emanuel Swedenborg. I'm Reverend Dr. David Brown. How's everyone doing? Groovy, man. I heard Peachy Keen over there, so that. Anyone here for their very first time? We got a whole row of you over there. Very nice. Well, enjoying the rain. We definitely need it. We've been getting a lot of it. So all of those prayers over the past several years have finally built up, and here we are. We got the Pineapple Express coming. Atmospheric rivers, another word for that. So that's exciting. What else? Well, let's see. I guess you notice the pew over there that's getting repaired. It's Project Week here at Wayfarers Chapel. Got a few things going on, but look at this. The sun's even coming out for all of you for a few minutes. Well, without let's see if I think of any other announcements. It is the third Sunday, so anyone who did participate in the To Be of Use team, and we've been having this for years. Actually, for anyone that doesn't know about our To Be of Use team, you can talk to me after service, and I'll get you plugged into it. But we have been, for people that went through the theology course years ago, one of the big pieces of our theology is about being useful. And you can think about that in an extension of how our physical bodies are very useful and how they function as for all that they do for us. But then also taking that out into the world and being useful, to be of use. So our team has been getting money every third Sunday of the month, and it goes towards the Garden Church, which is 6th Street, San Pedro, crossing the Warner Grand Theater, although today, because of the rain, and it is an outdoor church, the Church Without Walls, we are moving indoors at the San Pedro United Methodist Church today, so anyone that was planning on attending the 4 o'clock worship service, which I'll be leading that service today as well, but that money that we do every third Sunday goes to feed the food insecure, the housing insecure. There's a community meal after the worship service at 4, and that's served at 5 o'clock. So thank you for all the people who've been participating over the years for our To Be of Use team, and it's greatly appreciated. I'm going to be I have some gloves and some socks as well. While we do appreciate the rain, and for anyone that does not have shelter that they can depend upon. The rain does bring some added challenges. If anything gets wet, especially socks are one of the number one things that people who are shelter insecure are needing, because it not only is warm, but it's also necessary for just surviving the night and getting through what are challenging times in the winter. So thank you for anyone that did contribute to the To Be of Use team and for our community meal served this afternoon. Without further ado, I'll get into the scripture readings. Bless you. This is a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All humans are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. Ahimsa is a term meaning to do no harm, literally the avoidance of violence, which is called himsa. It is an important tenet for Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and especially Jainism. Ahimsa means kindness and nonviolence toward all living things, including animals. It respects living beings as a unity, the belief that all living things are connected. Indian leader Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi strongly believed in this principle. Avoidance of verbal and physical violence is also part of this principle, although ahimsa recognizes self-defense when necessary as a sign of a strong spirit. It is closely connected with the notion that all kinds of violence entail negative karmic consequences. From the Gospel of Matthew 25, verses 31 through 40, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me." And the last reading is from the Christian mystic Emanuel Swedenborg from Divine Providence 60. Heaven consists in this, that from the heart we wish better for ourselves, better for others than for ourselves, and desire to be of service to others in order to promote their happiness, and this for no selfish end, but from love. May the Lord add blessing to the reading, the hearing, the understanding, and indeed the living out of these holy words. Amen.
Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin if I can't help falling in love with you? Like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. So take my hand, take my whole life too, for I
Shortly after tying the knot, a young married couple started arguing over who should make the coffee. Being a good Christian woman, the wife went to the scriptures for her answer. She said that the Bible specifically stated that men should be the ones to make the coffee. Puzzled, the husband asked her where in the Bible it says that. Very confidently, the wife opened up her Bible and says, right here, Hebrews. Got your daily dose of theology this morning. This is from Howard Thurman. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among the people, to make music in the heart. And this is from Pierre Teilhard. Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, humans will have discovered fire. Today, we celebrate the life and ministry of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and his dedication to upholding the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, as well as Mahatma Gandhi. And this is a reflection from Richard Rohr, who says, part of the genius of Martin Luther King, Jr., inspired by the teachings of Jesus and Gandhi, was that he was able to show people that violence was not only immoral, but also impractical, and finally, futile. In the long run, violence does not achieve its own stated purposes, because it only deepens the bitterness on both sides. It leaves both sides in an endless and impossible cycle that cannot be stopped by itself. Instead, some neutralizing force must be inserted from outside to stop the cycle of violence and point us in a new direction. King would insist that true nonviolent practice is founded on spiritual seeing. He took it as axiomatic that the attitudes of nonviolence were finally impossible without an infusion of agape love from God, and our reliance upon that infusion. He defined agape love as willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation, willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation, and willingness to reconcile without the desire for domination. This is clearly a divine love that the small self cannot achieve by itself. We must live in through another to be truly nonviolent. At a 1960 lunch counter sit-in protesting segregation in Arlington, Virginia, Quaker peace activist David Hartsoe discovered God's power in the power of nonviolence. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. He continues, I was meditating on those words when I heard a voice behind me say, get out of this store in 2 seconds, or I'm going to stab this through your heart. I glanced behind me at a man with the most terrible look of hatred I have ever seen. His eyes blazed, his jaw quivered, and his shaking hand held the switchblade about half an inch from my heart. I turned around and tried my best to smile. Looking him in the eye, I said to him, "Friend, do what you believe is right, and I will still try to love you." Both his jaw and his hand dropped. Miraculously, he turned away and walked out of the store. He continues, "That was the most powerful experience in my 20 years of life. It confirmed my belief in the power of love, the power of goodness, the power of God working through us to overcome hatred and violence. I had a profound sense that nonviolence really works. At that moment, nonviolence became much more than a philosophical idea or a tacit that had made a difference in Gandhi's India. It became the way I wanted to relate to other human beings, a way of life, a way of working for change." My response had touched something in my accuser. He had seen me as an enemy, but through my response, I believe I became a human being to him. The humanity in each of us was touched. Methodist minister and activist James Lawson, after visiting followers of Gandhi in India to study nonviolent resistance in the 1950s, Lawson began training civil rights activists in principles and tactics of nonviolence. His students helped desegregate lunch counters and became freedom riders who pushed to integrate interstate travel. In response to a question about how he defines nonviolence, Lawson offers the following: "It is hard to define nonviolence. I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who first used the term. He maintained in his book, Nonviolence in Peace and War, that the term in his translation of the Jainist theory of ahimsa, where Gandhi translated ahimsa as do no harm, do no injury. Jainism was an ancient religion of India, begun around the same time as Jesus of Nazareth. That's one definition I cling to. It allows me to live, to function, to practice. Gandhi also stated that nonviolence is love in action, compassion and truth in action. And of course, he coined the word satyagraha, often translated as truth force or soul force, to further explain tenacity in truth, in the soul, in God, in struggle. So for me, nonviolence is that quality that comes out of all the great world religions. The notion that the creative force of the universe is love, that God is love, and that love is all-encompassing. Gandhi insisted, and I think that this is Gandhi's great contribution, that the creative force of the universe is the force that we humans must learn to exercise, because that force is the only force that can cause the human race to do God's will. And nonviolence is power. It is not, as I was taught in college in 1947, just persuasion. Persuasion is a form of power. Aristotle wrote that power is the capacity to achieve purpose. It is a God-given gift of creation to human beings. Nonviolence has its deep roots in the long journey of the human family, as people operated out of love and truth, despite all that was raging around them. As Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. also said, nonviolence is the science of how we create our own life in the image of God, how we create a world that practices justice, truth, and compassion. Gene Sharp was the first scholar to put together the science and the methodology of nonviolence. So I have a twofold definition. First, the religions of the world reflect on love and truth and power as the way the human race discovers how to carry out the will of eternity. Second, we're still learning about nonviolence as the science of bringing about personal and social change and establishing a world where all life is honored. And this gets back to the heart of what religion is, not only from an etymological meaning, but as a foundation for how we can move forward with right relations with one another, with creation, with God. The word religion at its roots means again, and ligios, connection, like ligaments. Religion is meant to offer us support to connect again what has been separated. Apparently, we need constant reminders to continually reconnect with the fullness of life, the whole, the holy. What we've created is more like disligion, disconnection from people and species unlike us. When religion loses its purpose and colludes with the forces of separation instead, it becomes irrelevant and even irreverent. This past week, I rewatched Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. And as many times as I've delivered something around Martin Luther King, I always have to have conversations about reminding people that he wasn't just civil rights, it wasn't just social justice. This was driven because he was not only Reverend Doctor, he was American Baptist minister. That was the driving force that connected him to a force larger than himself, connecting other people in the movement. And that's one of the most powerful 7 minutes I can recall. What was happening in that moment, you can see it, you can feel it. It was electric, transcendent, and alive. The night before Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he delivered a sermon on the night of April 3rd, 1968, at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, as a storm raged outside. He said, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." There was such prophetic understanding in that moment. His life was cut short the very next day. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew something about all of us deeply. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from him. "In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All humans are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality." Many people don't know he was originally named Michael King Jr. until his family traveled to Europe in 1934 and visited Germany. His father soon changed both of their names to Martin Luther in honor of the German Protestant leader Martin Luther. He skipped 2 grades in high school and entered Morehouse as an early admission student at the age of 15 in 1948. The youngest person to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize at age 35. And he was deeply influenced by nonviolent protests of Mahatma Gandhi and his devotion to ahimsa, to do no harm. I am quite certain that scripture that was read today was not missed by Martin Luther King. From Matthew 25, verse 40, And the king will answer them, I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you have done it to me. When we see the foundations and the roots for why we do things in the world that are connected, we rebind, we re-ligament those connections to one another. We see that spark of divinity within all of creation. That's essentially what is there in what Jesus is teaching through that gospel story, the least of these. He instructed his followers to not use violence even when they were being attacked, and led a theological discussion this past Thursday about the challenge that must be for anyone who's going to preach or teach nonviolence, for others to get involved in a movement. In essence, his message of peace and divine love for fellow brothers and sisters, it became such a radical movement that it led to his violent assassination. In other words, his movement had grown so powerful, so large, that it became a direct threat to people in positions of power. This is a question that Martin Luther King leaves for all of us. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And this question is also echoed through the scriptures that we read through this morning, and I'll leave us with these words. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. May the Lord so help us all to be reminded of how we can be in the world, how we can relate to one another, how we can see that spark of divinity in all of creation and within one another, to live out a life as best we can that is free of violence in heart and mind and body and soul, in our thoughts and the words that we speak. May the Lord so help us all. Amen.